You people always want to touch what you can't afford. The boutique manager's voice cracked through the rain like a slap. His finger jabbed inches from an old woman's face. She stood soaked to the bone in the middle of the sidewalk, shattered porcelain scattered around her feet, her hands trembling, not from guilt, but from the particular helplessness of being humiliated in public with nowhere to hide. A dozen strangers had already gathered under nearby awnings. Phones were rising to film her. Someone laughed. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody, except the young black woman who had just turned the corner, stopped mid-stride, and was now walking directly into the center of it, about to make a decision in the next 10 seconds that would quietly rewrite the rest of her life and the lives of a family she didn't even know existed yet. Before we go further, if you're the kind of person who believes kindness still means something in this world, hit that subscribe button right now, tap like, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from tonight. You're going to want to be part of this one till the very end. Her name was Precious Williams. 30 years old, Chicago-born, raised by Nigerian parents who worked themselves thin so their daughter could have a life they never got the chance to build for themselves. Her father drove a cab for 11 years without a single sick day. Her mother cleaned office buildings at 4 in the morning before most of Chicago had even opened its eyes. They didn't leave Precious money. They left her something they said mattered more. Your character is the only wealth nobody can steal from you, her father used to tell her, tapping 2 fingers gently against her chest whenever she came home crying about something unfair that had happened at school. She hadn't understood it then. She understood it painfully well now, standing in the rain outside a boutique in Seoul, 3,000 miles and an ocean away from the 2 people who raised her. Both gone now, taken within 18 months of each other, leaving her with nothing but their voices in her memory and a hole in her chest she still hadn't learned how to fill. Seoul was supposed to be an escape, a quiet reset in a city where nobody knew her name, nobody looked at her with pity, nobody expected her to hold herself together in front of people who remembered her parents. She had a master's degree in international business, sitting in a drawer she barely opened anymore, because in Seoul, that degree meant almost nothing without the right connections, the right last name, and sometimes even the right face. She'd applied to 14 companies in her first year, 13 rejections. 1 customer service job at a call center, answering complaints from tourists in 3 different languages for less money than she used to make, interning back in Chicago. She didn't complain. She sent half of every paycheck back to an aunt in Lagos, raising 3 of Precious's cousins alone. On weekends, she mentored young African women who had come to Korea chasing the same dream she once had. Women who didn't know how to navigate visa offices, who got quietly turned away from apartments the moment landlords saw their faces, who needed someone to tell them, "You are not invisible. I see you." Precious had built an entire quiet life out of showing up for people nobody else showed up for. And so, standing in that rain outside the boutique, watching a room full of strangers decide an old woman's humiliation wasn't their problem, something in Precious simply refused to keep walking. She grabbed it off the display and dropped it. "I saw the whole thing," the manager barked again, jabbing his finger back toward the old woman's face. "Do you know how much this costs? Somebody call security." "I didn't mean to," the old woman said quietly, her voice shaking, not from guilt, but from the particular exhaustion of being talked down to. "I only wanted to look closer. Look, you people always want to touch what you can't afford." A ripple of laughter moved through a few onlookers. Someone lifted a phone to record. Nobody stepped forward. Precious stepped forward. "How much is the vase?" she asked, cutting cleanly through the noise, her voice calm but immovable, the kind of calm that makes a room go quiet before it even registers why. The manager blinked, thrown off. "Excuse me? I'm asking you how much the vase costs. I'll pay for it." "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me now," Precious said, already pulling out her card, her hands steady, even though her heart was pounding, even though paying for a stranger's mistake meant her account would be sitting dangerously close to zero until her next paycheck. So either tell me the price, or I start filming this conversation and post it with your name tag in frame. The manager's face went through 3 colors before he named the price. It was more than Precious made in 2 weeks. She paid it anyway, without flinching, without a second look at her own account balance, dropping into numbers that would keep her up at night. Then she turned to the old woman, whose hands were shaking harder now, a thin line of blood beading across her palm from where the porcelain had cut her. Precious knelt right there on the wet sidewalk, tore a clean tissue from her bag, and began wrapping the woman's hand with the gentleness of someone who had done this before, who understood that some wounds need tending long before they need explaining. "Let's get you somewhere warm," Precious said softly. The old woman looked at her the way people look at something they can't quite believe is real. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to know you to see you're hurting," Precious answered simply, helping her to her feet. "Come on." They walked 2 blocks to a small cafe, rain still falling, the old woman leaning slightly on Precious's arm the entire way, saying nothing, studying this young stranger's face like she was trying to memorize it. Inside, over 2 cups of ginger tea, Precious paid for out of what little cash she had left in her coat pocket. The old woman finally spoke. "Why did you help me? You don't know if I did it on purpose. You don't know anything about me." Precious considered the question honestly, the way she considered most things. "It didn't matter to me whether you broke it on purpose. What mattered is that a room full of people watched an old woman get humiliated in the rain and decided it wasn't their problem." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "My mother used to say, the world doesn't need more people who wait to see who's already helping before they decide to help too. I try not to be one of those people." The old woman's eyes glistened, though she blinked it away quickly, straightening her spine like someone used to hiding emotion in public. "You paid a great deal of money for a stranger." "It's just money," Precious said, and something about the way she said it, not performative, not humble bragging, just tired and true, made the old woman go very still. "Let me repay you," the old woman said. "Please. Give me your account information, your address, anything." Precious shook her head, already gathering her things, glancing at the darkening sky, thinking about the last bus she needed to catch. "If you really want to thank me," she said, standing, offering the old woman one final warm smile. "Someday, help someone else who needs it more than I do." And then she walked out into the rain, disappearing into the crowd, never once asking the old woman's name. She had no idea she had just spent an hour with Madam Kang, matriarch of the Kang Group, one of the most powerful business dynasties in the country, grandmother of Chairman Kang Min-jun, the youngest and most talked about billionaire industrialist in Korea. She had no idea that when Madam Kang's private security finally located her 40 minutes later, panicked, apologizing, begging forgiveness for losing track of her for a single afternoon, the old woman would say only 6 words: "Do not tell my family anything." Because Madam Kang knew exactly what would happen if her grandson found out. Min-jun would burn that boutique to the ground financially before sundown. He'd have the manager's career erased with a single phone call. He'd turn her humiliation into a headline, a lawsuit, a public spectacle of vengeance. And somewhere in all of that noise, the only thing that actually mattered would get lost completely: the girl. The stranger who saw an old woman and not a name, who gave everything she had without knowing there was anything to gain. Madam Kang didn't want revenge. She wanted to find her again. If you're starting to feel that pull in your chest right now, that feeling that something bigger is unfolding beneath this simple act of kindness, don't scroll past it. Like this video, and if you believe kindness always finds its way back to the giver, eventually, type "always" in the comments. You're going to want to remember you said that. It took Madam Kang's people 3 weeks to identify her. Not because they lacked resources. The Kang family could locate almost anyone in the country within hours if they wanted to. But because Madam Kang insisted on doing it quietly, without her usual staff, without her grandson's formidable intelligence network, using only a retired detective who had once worked for her late husband and who understood the meaning of discretion. When they finally found her, Precious Williams, customer service representative, address in a modest apartment complex, 2 train transfers from downtown, no family in the country, sends money to Nigeria monthly, volunteers Saturdays mentoring immigrant women. Madam Kang read the file twice before setting it down on her lap and staring out at her garden for a long time. She didn't call Precious. She went to find her in person, disguised in a plain cardigan and headscarf, waiting outside the community center where Precious ran her Saturday mentoring sessions. When Precious walked out, laughing with 2 young women half her age, carrying a stack of resume templates under one arm, she nearly walked straight past the old woman sitting on the bench. "You," Precious said, stopping mid-step, recognition flooding her face. "The woman from the boutique. Are you all right? Your hand." "Healed," Madam Kang said, holding it up, a faint pink scar the only remaining evidence. "I came to ask you something, if you have a few minutes." They sat together on that bench for nearly 2 hours. Madam Kang asked about Chicago, about Precious's parents, gently, watching her carefully as grief moved across the younger woman's face, and then receded, practiced, familiar, the way grief looks on someone who has learned to carry it without letting it show. She asked about the mentoring program, about the women Precious helped, about why a person with a master's degree spent her Saturdays doing unpaid work for strangers instead of resting. "Because somebody did it for me once," Precious said simply. "Back home, there was a woman at my church who helped me fill out my first college application when my parents didn't understand the American system. I never forgot what that felt like. Somebody choosing to see you when they didn't have to." Madam Kang said nothing for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick. "I would like to see you again, if you'll allow an old woman the company." Precious smiled, thinking she'd made an unusual, wonderful new friend, a wealthy, elderly widow perhaps, lonely in a way money couldn't fix. She had no idea she was looking into the eyes of the most powerful matriarch in the country. She had no idea her life was about to change. Over the following months, they met for tea nearly every week. Madam Kang never mentioned her family name. Precious never asked, assuming an old woman who dressed simply and rode public transportation lived a modest life like her own. Their conversations deepened, about loneliness, about the particular grief of building a life far from where you were born, about the strange gift and burden of being the one who always shows up for everyone else, while nobody quite shows up for you the same way. What Precious didn't know was that during those same months, a folder began quietly appearing on the desk of the director of the Kang Cultural Foundation. A recommendation letter, unsigned. A resume, flagged for priority review. A young woman named Precious Williams, whose qualifications, once actually read by someone with authority to act on them, turned out to be extraordinary. Fluent in 3 languages, a master's degree in international business, a demonstrated passion for cross-cultural community work that read less like a resume line and more like a mission statement. When Precious received the call, offering her a position as program coordinator for the Foundation's African Cultural Exchange Initiative, nearly triple her old salary, full benefits, an office with her name on the door, she cried on the subway platform, certain that after years of being overlooked, her qualifications had simply, finally, been seen. She never once suspected the invisible hand that had quietly opened the door. Meanwhile, in a boardroom 40 floors above the city, Chairman Kang Min-jun sat through his 4th argument of the week with his mother about his love life, staring out the window with the particular exhaustion of a man who had learned, expensively, that almost everyone who claimed to love him actually loved what he could give them. There had been the actress who leaked their private dinners to build her own brand. The heiress who negotiated a prenuptial clause about magazine exclusives before she'd even agreed to date him seriously. The venture capitalist's daughter who once, in an unguarded moment over wine, referred to their potential marriage as a merger with excellent optics. He was 34 years old, worth more than most countries' GDP, and he had never once been kissed by someone who wasn't doing the math in the back of their mind while it happened. "You need to move on," his mother said, not for the first time, sliding a folder of eligible women across his desk like a business proposal. "COR is perfect for you. Her family, her education, her public image, everything aligns." Minjun didn't open the folder. "Everything except love, you mean? Love is a luxury for people who don't have a family legacy resting on their shoulders," his mother said flatly, and left the room before he could argue further. He began seeing Yoon So-ah 2 weeks later, mostly to end the conversation, mostly because she was, by every visible measure, exactly the kind of woman a man in his position was supposed to end up with. Brilliant, glamorous, comfortable in rooms full of cameras and old money. His grandmother watched the relationship unfold from a distance with an expression nobody could quite read. Because Madam Kang already knew something her grandson hadn't figured out yet. Yoon So-ah had no interest in building a family. She had every interest in being seen beside the most eligible bachelor in the country, in the headlines that came with his name, in the influence his world afforded her. But the moment conversations turned toward marriage, children, a future beyond appearances, something in her eyes went cold and calculating in a way that made even Minjun's mother's enthusiasm start to falter. Madam Kang said nothing. She simply kept meeting Precious for tea, kept watching her grandson's loneliness deepen despite the woman on his arm, and kept turning over a single, quiet thought that had been growing in her chest since the day a stranger knelt beside her in the rain and asked for nothing in return. She had found the one person in this entire, glittering, hollow world who had loved her before knowing what she was worth. Now, she just had to find a way to let her grandson discover the same thing, without either of them realizing, until it was already too late to run from it, that Madam Kang had been quietly rearranging the pieces of their lives all along. The first move came 3 weeks later, in the form of an invitation neither of them expected, to an event that would put Precious and Minjun in the same room for the first time, though neither of them yet knew the other's name, and neither of them yet understood that a Foundation cultural gala Precious had been asked to help organize was, in fact, the Kang family's foundation, hosted by the Kang family's chairman in the Kang family's own home. Madam Kang smiled to herself as she signed the approval for the guest list, adding one final name at the very bottom in her own handwriting. She had waited months for this moment. She wasn't about to leave it to chance. But 2 floors below her study, in a security office nobody paid much attention to, a junior staffer flagged something strange in the Foundation's hiring records. A rapid, unexplained promotion with no clear paper trail behind it, and forwarded the file, out of routine procedure, to exactly the person Madam Kang had been most careful to keep in the dark. Yoon So-ah opened the email on her phone that evening, sitting across from Minjun at dinner, and went very quiet. "Something wrong?" Minjun asked, not really looking up from his plate. So-ah smiled, sliding her phone face down onto the table. "Nothing at all," she said sweetly. But her mind was already working, already 3 steps ahead, already sensing an opportunity in the shape of a mystery nobody else had noticed yet. A mystery with a name attached to it that she intended to learn everything about before anyone else in that family did. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in golden light and quiet tension nobody in the room could name yet. Precious had spent 3 sleepless weeks turning the Kang Foundation's Cultural Exchange Gala into something she was genuinely proud of, a night celebrating African artisans, musicians, and entrepreneurs, building bridges into the Korean market, a project she had fought for, in meetings where she was often the only black woman, often the only person in the room who had to explain twice why representation mattered before anyone nodded along. She'd hand-selected every performer. She'd translated every program note herself, refusing to let anyone flatten the culture she was showcasing into something easier to digest. This wasn't just an event to her. It was proof that the work she'd built her whole adult life around finally had a stage worthy of it. She was adjusting the final centerpiece on the head table when a voice behind her, flat and clearly unimpressed, said, "This seating arrangement is wrong." She turned, expecting a nervous assistant. Instead, she found a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit, arms crossed, studying the room like he owned it, which, she would soon learn, he did. "Excuse me? The ambassador should not be seated beside the investment group. It's a diplomatic mismatch. Whoever planned this clearly doesn't understand protocol." He said it without looking at her directly, already moving to rearrange a place card. Something in Precious's chest flared. She'd worked 18-hour days for 3 straight weeks. She had personally called every guest to confirm dietary requirements and cultural preferences. And now, some entitled stranger in an expensive suit was rewriting her work in front of her without so much as introducing himself. "I planned this," she said, stepping directly into his space, voice steady but sharp. "And the ambassador specifically requested to sit with the investment group. He's exploring a partnership. If you'd like to critique the seating chart, I'd suggest first learning who's actually sitting in the seats." He finally looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. "You're the coordinator," he said, slowly, recalculating. "I'm the coordinator," she confirmed, "and you are standing in the middle of my event, rearranging my work without asking my name." "Kang Min-jun," he said, and watched carefully for the reaction that always came next. The recognition, the sudden shift in posture, the flicker of calculation in someone's eyes once they realized exactly who they were speaking to. "It didn't come, Precious Williams," she replied simply, already turning back to the centerpiece, like his name meant nothing more to her than any other guest on her list. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Kang, I have a gala to run." He stood there, a moment longer than he meant to, genuinely unsettled by how thoroughly she had dismissed him. Not rudely, just completely unbothered, the way a person behaves around someone whose title carries no weight for them because they've never once needed it to. He wasn't used to that. He didn't know what to do with it. Across the room, tucked into a quiet corner, with a glass of champagne she wasn't drinking, Madam Kang watched the entire exchange with the barely contained satisfaction of a woman watching a plan she had spent months constructing finally begin to move on its own. If you felt that spark just now, that little electric moment when 2 stubborn people refuse to back down from each other, comment below with a single word that describes what you think is about to happen between them. I promise you, some of you are going to be very wrong, and some of you are going to see something coming that the characters themselves haven't figured out yet. The gala was, by every measure, a triumph. The ambassador did sign a preliminary partnership agreement. The Nigerian textile designer Precious had personally recruited, sold out her entire showcase within the first hour. Reporters covering the event kept using the word unprecedented. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Precious allowed herself to feel something close to pride, standing perfectly still in the middle of a room she had built from nothing. Min-jun found her again near the end of the night, standing alone on the terrace, having finally allowed herself 5 minutes away from the crowd. "You were right about the ambassador," he said, joining her at the railing, no longer combative, something almost sheepish in his voice. "I usually am," she said, and he laughed. A short, surprised sound, like he hadn't expected himself to do it. "Most people don't talk to me the way you did tonight. Most people probably know who you are before they talk to you. she said, glancing at him sideways. I just knew you were rearranging my seating chart. He was quiet for a moment, studying the skyline instead of her. Would it have changed how you spoke to me, if you'd known? Precious considered the question honestly, the way she considered most things. I don't think so. I think rudeness is rudeness, whether it comes wrapped in a title or not. She paused. But for what it's worth, the event went well, because a lot of people worked hard on it, not just me. He looked at her then, really looked, the same way he had inside, except something in his expression had shifted from irritation into something closer to disbelief. He had spent a decade surrounded by people who curated every word for his benefit, and here was a woman who hadn't curated a single syllable. His grandmother's laughter carried faintly from inside the ballroom, warm and unrestrained, the kind of laugh Min-jun hadn't heard from her in years. He glanced through the glass doors and found her seated with a small group of Precious's mentoring students, animated, glowing, more alive than he'd seen her look in longer than he could remember. She likes you, he said, nodding toward his grandmother. A lot, actually. She talks about you constantly. I never understood why, until tonight. She's become like family to me, Precious admitted softly, a small, private smile crossing her face. I don't have much family left. She's filled a space I didn't know how empty it was. Something tightened in Min-jun's chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He thought of every calculated conversation he'd had in this exact spot with other women. Women who mentioned his grandmother's health only in relation to inheritance timelines. Women who asked about the company before asking about him. Precious hadn't asked him a single question about the Kang group all night. Have dinner with me, he said, the words leaving him before he'd fully decided to say them. Precious raised an eyebrow. Is that an order, Chairman Kang? A request, he corrected, something almost boyish flickering across his usually composed face. One dinner. I'd like to understand what makes a woman completely unimpressed by everything I've spent my entire life being told matters. She should have said no. Every instinct built from years of being underestimated told her men like him didn't choose women like her. Not seriously, not for anything beyond a temporary curiosity. But something about the honesty in his voice, the genuine confusion of a man who had never once been told no, and clearly didn't know what to do with it, made her smile despite herself. One dinner, she agreed. Don't make me regret it. Neither of them told Madam Kang what happened on that terrace. They didn't need to. She'd been watching through the glass the entire time, and when her grandson returned inside, with an expression she hadn't seen on his face since he was a boy who still believed in things, she simply raised her champagne glass to her lips to hide the smile she couldn't stop. The dinner became a second dinner. The second became a standing Thursday tradition, neither of them officially named. They argued about food, about music, about whether Chicago deep dish deserved to be called pizza at all. He learned she hummed old gospel songs under her breath when she was concentrating. She learned that underneath the cold, calculated chairman the tabloids loved to photograph, there was a boy who used to build model airplanes with his late grandfather and hadn't touched one since the funeral. Neither of them called it falling in love. Both of them lay awake most nights replaying the conversations anyway, and Madam Kang, watching quietly from the wings of a story she had spent nearly a year carefully authoring, allowed herself, for the first time, to believe that everything might actually work, which was, of course, exactly when it began to fall apart. Yoon So-ah had not disappeared quietly. Publicly, her breakup with Min-jun had been framed as mutual, dignified, unremarkable. Privately, she had spent the following weeks pulling threads, and the anonymous flag on Precious's employment file had given her exactly the loose end she needed. It didn't take her long to find the truth. A foundation director who, under gentle but insistent questioning over lunch, let slip that Precious's promotion had come from an unsigned recommendation traced back to Madam Kang's personal office. A retired detective's expense report, buried in old family accounting records, showing 3 weeks of surveillance work commissioned by the matriarch herself, dated to shortly after a minor, unreported incident outside a boutique in the rain. Seoul put it together with the precision of someone who had spent years learning how this family operated. And rather than expose it publicly, rather than hand Madam Kang the satisfaction of a scandal she could control, she requested a quiet, private lunch with Precious instead. "I wanted to meet the woman who's made Minjun smile again," Seoul said warmly, stirring her tea, every word deliberately gentle. "I mean that sincerely. He seems happier than I've seen him in years." Precious, caught off guard by the kindness, softened. "That's generous of you to say. I'm not here to be cruel," Seoul continued, and for a while, she wasn't. She asked genuine questions about Precious's family, her work, her mentoring students, listening with what appeared to be real warmth. Then, gently, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Has Madam Kang ever told you how you two actually met?" Precious blinked. "We met at a boutique. I helped her. That's what she told you," Seoul said softly. "Did she also tell you she had you investigated for 3 weeks afterward? That your promotion at the foundation didn't come from a hiring committee, it came from a personal recommendation written by her, timed exactly to when the gala started needing a coordinator, timed exactly to when her grandson needed someone to fall for who wasn't like the rest of us?" The cafe noise seemed to fade around Precious as the pieces rearranged themselves in her mind, faster than she could stop them. The sudden promotion she'd been so proud of, the frequent invitations to the estate, the seating arrangements at dinner that always, somehow, placed her beside Minjun. The gala she'd been handed, with almost no competition for the role. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," Seoul said, reaching briefly for Precious's hand, her voice dropping into something almost tender. "I'm saying it because I care what happens to you. Because I know what it feels like to fall for a story someone else wrote for you, and wake up one day wondering if anyone in that room actually chose you, or if you were simply placed there." She squeezed her hand once, gently, and let go. "Ask yourself honestly, if his grandmother hadn't engineered every single moment between you, would Kang Minjun have ever noticed you at all?" She left the check paid, and Precious sitting in stunned silence, the warmth of the afternoon curdling into something cold and disorienting. If this hit you the way I think it's going to hit a lot of you watching right now, that horrible feeling of wondering whether something real was actually real, go ahead and like this video, and if you've ever had someone plant a doubt in your mind about the people you love, tell us about it in the comments. This story is about to ask the same question every one of us has had to face at some point. Precious didn't visit the estate that week. She let 3 of Minjun's calls go to voicemail. She skipped their standing Thursday dinner without explanation, sitting alone in her apartment instead, staring at nothing, replaying every kindness Madam Kang had ever shown her, and wondering, with a heaviness that made her physically ill, whether any of it had been real friendship, or whether she had simply been a carefully selected instrument in someone else's plan. Minjun noticed the distance immediately. He noticed it the way you notice a room going cold. He showed up at her apartment on the 4th night, refusing to leave the hallway until she opened the door. "What happened?" he asked, and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice cracked slightly around the edges, stripped of every ounce of chairman composure. "Did you know?" Precious asked, instead of answering, arms crossed tight around herself. "That your grandmother had me investigated, that she arranged my promotion, that she's been placing us in the same rooms for months. Did you know any of it?" Minjun's silence, brief as it was, told her everything. "I didn't know the details," he admitted quietly, "but I suspected. My grandmother doesn't do anything by accident. I should have told you. I'm sorry." "So this whole time," Precious said, her voice trembling now, despite every effort to keep it steady, "I thought I found a friend who saw me for exactly who I am, and instead, I was a project. A plan, something to fix your loneliness and secure your family's future, all at once. That's not, isn't it? She cut in, tears finally breaking loose, hot and furious and heartbroken all at once. Because from where I'm standing, everyone in your family seems to have decided who I am before I ever got to decide it myself. She closed the door gently, not slammed, which somehow made it worse. The quiet finality of it, the sound of someone choosing distance, not out of anger, but out of genuine, wounded uncertainty about whether anything in her life, since that rainy afternoon, had been real. Minjun stood in that hallway for a long time before he finally walked away. He went straight to his grandmother's estate, and for the first time in his adult life, he raised his voice at the one person he had never once dared to. "Did you plan this?" he demanded, standing in the doorway of her study. "All of it? From the very beginning?" Madam Kang set down her book slowly, unsurprised, as though she had been waiting for this exact conversation for months. "Sit down, Minjun. Answer me." "Yes," she said simply, without flinching, without apology in her voice, though her eyes carried something heavier than either. "I found her. I arranged her promotion. I placed her in your path, over and over, because I watched you die a little more, with every woman who saw a fortune before they saw a man." She stood, crossing the room slowly, her cane tapping softly against the floor. "But I did not make you fall in love with her, Minjun. I only gave two lonely people the chance to actually see each other. What grew between you, that part, was never mine to engineer. She thinks I don't actually see her, that I was just following a plan. Then go make her understand the difference," Madam Kang said quietly, "before you lose the one thing in this family more valuable than everything else we've ever built." But before Minjun could act on those words, before he could find a way to close the widening distance between himself and Precious, Madam Kang's own body made the decision for all of them. She collapsed in her garden 2 mornings later, alone, found only because a housekeeper happened to bring tea earlier than usual. By the time the ambulance reached the estate, she had already lost consciousness, her heart straining under months of quiet stress she had carried entirely alone, the stress of orchestrating a plan she desperately needed to succeed, the stress of a secret she had never told her grandson the full truth of, the stress of racing against time she didn't know how little of she had left. Precious heard the news from a mentoring student who'd seen it break on the entertainment news. She didn't hesitate for even a second, old hurt forgotten, grabbing her coat and running out the door before she'd even finished processing what she'd read. She arrived at the hospital at the same moment Minjun did, both of them breathless, both of them terrified. Standing on opposite sides of a sliding door, neither of them knew how to walk through together anymore. "Is she?" Precious started. "Stable," Minjun said quickly. "For now, they don't know yet." They sat 3 chairs apart in that waiting room for nearly 6 hours, saying almost nothing, both of them too afraid to reach across the distance, still sitting unresolved between them, both of them silently praying to whatever God either of them still believed in, that the woman who had quietly rearranged both their lives would get the chance to see how her story actually ended. Near midnight, a nurse finally allowed them in, 2 at a time, and Madam Kang, weak but conscious, reached one trembling hand toward Precious the moment she saw her. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came," Precious said, voice breaking, taking the frail hand in both of hers. Madam Kang's eyes moved slowly between the two of them, the distance still visible between where they stood, the careful space they'd both left unclosed, and something like grief passed across her tired face. "I have to tell you both something," she said, her voice thin but urgent, as though she had been holding it too long and could no longer afford to wait. "Before it's too late to say it." Minjun stepped closer. "Grandmother, rest. It can wait." "No," she said firmly, gripping Precious's hand tighter. "It cannot." And there, in a hospital room, lit only by the pale blue glow of a heart monitor, Madam Kang finally told them everything. The rainy afternoon outside the boutique, the vase, the humiliation, the stranger who knelt in the street to clean her wounds and asked for nothing but that she pass the kindness forward. She told them about the detective, the months of quiet friendship, the recommendation letter she'd written with her own trembling hand. She told them she hadn't done it to manipulate either of them into love. She'd done it because for 1 hour in the rain, a woman with almost nothing left in her bank account had chosen kindness over convenience. And Madam Kang had spent every day since then believing that kind of character deserved to be woven permanently into the only family she had left. Precious's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely now, the entire shape of her life over the last year rearranging itself in real time. "That was you," she whispered. "The old woman in the rain. That was you the whole time." "I never forgot your face," Madam Kang said, smiling weakly. "I have spent nearly a year trying to build a bridge back to you, without you ever knowing you'd already crossed it once, for free, expecting nothing in return." Minjun sank slowly into the chair beside the bed, staring at Precious, with an expression that had shed every ounce of chairman composure he'd built his whole adult identity around. "You're the woman from the story," he said quietly. "The one my grandmother told me about last year. The one who paid for a stranger's mistake and walked away without asking for anything." He shook his head slowly, disbelief and something far softer moving across his face at once. "I fell in love with you twice, and I didn't even know it the first time." "I didn't plan any of this," Precious said, through her tears, looking between the two of them. "I didn't help you for a reward. I didn't fall for him because of a plan. I fell for him because of who he actually is, when nobody's watching. The same reason I helped you, because that's what I saw." Madam Kang's eyes fluttered closed briefly, exhausted, but at peace, in a way her body hadn't allowed her to feel in months. "Then stop being afraid of a gift," she whispered, "simply because it arrived wrapped in my meddling. This is the part of the story where I need you to pause for just a second. If you've ever doubted whether you were loved for who you really are, or worried a good thing in your life was too complicated to be real, like this video right now, and comment the word "seen." Because sometimes the most powerful thing another person can do for you is simply witness you clearly, exactly as Precious did for a stranger in the rain, without ever needing a reason. Madam Kang recovered slowly over the following weeks, stubbornly discharging herself from the hospital 2 days earlier than her doctors advised, insisting she had a wedding to help plan and no patience left to waste, lying in a bed. Precious and Minjun, the distance between them finally closed for good, spent those weeks rebuilding something steadier than what had come before. Not a fairy tale assembled by someone else's hand, but a choice they kept making for each other, daily, deliberately, with full knowledge now of everything that had brought them together. Yoon So-ah's attempt to fracture what she'd uncovered eventually reached Minjun's ears in full, and though Precious asked him, gently, not to retaliate, he made certain, quietly, through channels that never made headlines, that So-ah's influence in the circles she valued most began to feel considerably smaller than it once had. Some consequences don't need cameras to be real. 6 months later, in the same garden where Madam Kang had collapsed and very nearly run out of time to say what mattered most, 3 generations of a newly reshaped family gathered around a single long table. No cameras, no press releases, no board members, just Precious's aunt, flown in from Lagos for the first time in her life, marveling at everything, laughing loudly at Minjun's terrible attempts at Nigerian jollof rice. Just Minjun's mother, softened considerably by watching her son laugh the way he used to as a boy. Just Madam Kang, seated at the head of the table exactly where she belonged, watching the family she had quietly, patiently, lovingly engineered finally come fully alive in front of her. "You know," she said, raising her glass with a mischievous glint in her eye, looking directly at Precious, "you once told me that if I truly wanted to thank you, I should help someone else who needed it, more than you did. Precious laughed softly, remembering. I remember. I think, Madam Kang said, gesturing slowly around the table, at her grandson's hand intertwined with Precious's, at the family filling a home that had been far too quiet for far too long. I finally found the someone. If this story moved something in you tonight, if it reminded you that the smallest act of kindness can echo further than you'll ever get to witness, do one thing for me before you go. Subscribe so you never miss the next story like this one. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that character still matters in this world. And before you close this video, tell us in the comments the biggest lesson you're walking away with tonight. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone is standing at the edge of a decision, just like Precious once was. A chance to help a stranger who can offer them nothing in return. A chance to be kind, simply because kindness is who they are. And they have no idea, not yet, just how far that single choice might carry them.